Commander Marcus Cole stood at the viewing window of Concordance Prime and watched the stars spin slowly in the eternal darkness of space. He was not supposed to be here. 3 months ago, he had been fighting rebels in the outer colonies, leading his squad through burning corridors and shattered hulls, doing what he did best. Then the orders came from Earth Command and everything changed. Now he wore a ceremonial uniform instead of battle armor and carried a polished sidearm. Instead of his trusted plasma rifle, his new mission was simple in words, but complicated in every other way. He was to serve as personal security for Princess Lyra Thin of the Volanthi Dominion during peace negotiations between their species. The Volanthi were one of the oldest races in the known galaxy, and they never let anyone forget it. They stood nearly 7 feet tall with bodies that seemed to be made of living light and crystal. Their bones were visible through their translucent skin, glowing with soft colors that shifted with their moods. They moved like dancers and spoke like poets and looked at humans the way humans might look at insects. Crawling across a kitchen floor, Marcus had met the princess exactly once. She had glanced at him with her enormous silver eyes, said nothing, and turned away as if he did not exist. That was 3 days ago, and she had not acknowledged him since. He followed her through the station like a shadow, watching for threats while she attended meetings and dinners and ceremonies. She never spoke to him directly. When she needed something, she spoke to her Volanthi attendants, who then spoke to the human liaison, who then spoke to Marcus. It was like being a ghost. Present but invisible, necessary but unwanted. Marcus did not complain. He had learned long ago that complaining changed nothing and only made time move slower. So he watched and waited and did his job. The peace negotiations were important to Earth, in ways Marcus did not fully understand. The Volanthi had technology that was centuries ahead of anything humans had developed. Their ships could cross the galaxy in days instead of months. Their medicine could cure diseases that still killed millions of humans every year. Their weapons could crack planets like eggs. An alliance with the Volanthi would change everything for humanity. But the Volanthi did not seem interested in allies. They seemed interested in subjects, in lesser beings who would bow and scrape and be grateful for whatever scraps of knowledge the great Volanthi Dominion chose to share. Marcus watched the princess glide into the formal dining hall for another evening of negotiations and politics. She was beautiful in the way a star was beautiful, bright and cold and impossibly distant. Her attendants arranged themselves around her like planets orbiting a sun. The human delegates sat across the long table, trying to look confident and sophisticated, while the Volanthi looked at them with barely hidden contempt. Marcus took his position near the wall, his eyes moving constantly across the room. He noted the exits and the guards and the placement of every person. It was habit, trained into him through years of combat and survival. The dinner began with speeches that Marcus did not listen to. He had heard enough speeches to last several lifetimes. Instead, he watched the room, studying patterns and movements, looking for anything out of place. That was when he noticed the environmental panel near the ceiling. It was a small thing, barely visible, but something about it was wrong. The ventilation grating was tilted at an angle that did not match the others in the room. Marcus watched it for a long moment, his instincts screaming warnings that his conscious mind was still trying to understand. Then he saw it. A tiny red light blinked once behind the grating. He had seen that light before, in the outer colonies, moments before plasma bolts had torn through walls and bodies, and everything he cared about. Marcus did not think. He moved. His body launched across the dining hall before his mind fully processed what was happening. He crashed into the princess with all his weight, driving her to the floor beneath him as a bolt of superheated plasma screamed through the space where head had been. The bolt struck the far wall and exploded in a shower of molten metal and crystal. Chaos erupted. Volanthi guards drew weapons and shouted in their musical language. Human security forces poured through the doors. Alarms screamed through the station, but Marcus did not move. He stayed on top of the princess, his body a shield between her and whatever other threats might come. She struggled beneath him, her silver eyes wide with shock and something that might have been fear. "Stay down," Marcus said, his voice calm despite the thunder of his heart. "Release me," she demanded, her voice carrying the weight of 10,000 years of royal authority. "When the room is secure," Marcus replied, and he did not move. It took several minutes for the Volanti guards to clear the room and determine that there were no other threats. Only then did Marcus rise and offer his hand to the princess. She did not take it. She stood on her own, her crystalline bones flashing with colors Marcus did not recognize. "You touched me," she said, and her voice was ice and fire and the cold depths of space. "I saved your life," Marcus replied. "You put your hands on a princess of the Volanti Dominion. Would you prefer I let you die instead?" She stared at him, and Marcus stared back. He had faced down rebel warlords and alien predators and the empty void of space itself. He was not going to be intimidated by royal displeasure. Something flickered in her silver eyes. Something that might have been surprise, or respect, or simply confusion. No one had ever spoken to her this way. "The threat has been neutralized," a Volanti guard announced. "It appears to be the work of the purist faction, extremists who oppose any contact with lesser species." The guard glanced at Marcus when he said lesser species, leaving no doubt about who he meant. But Marcus was not listening to the guard. He was looking at the remains of the weapon platform that had nearly killed the princess. He recognized the power coupling and the targeting system. It was not Volanti technology. It was not human technology either. It was something else. Something that should not have been on this station at all. Someone else wanted the princess dead. Someone with resources and technology beyond anything the so-called purist faction could possess. Marcus looked at the princess and found her looking back at him. In that moment, something passed between them. An understanding that neither could put into words. This was not over. This was only the beginning, and whether she liked it or not, Marcus Cole was now the only thing standing between Princess Lyrethan and whoever wanted her dead. He had sworn to protect her, and he would keep that oath, even if she hated him for it. The mining outpost had been abandoned for 20 years, and it showed. Dust covered every surface, and the air recyclers wheezed like dying animals, and the lights flickered in patterns that made Marcus think of old horror films from Earth. But it was hidden and it was defensible, and right now those were the only things that mattered. Princess Lyrethan stood in the center of the main room and looked around with an expression of pure horror. "This is where you have brought me," she said, and her voice carried disbelief and anger in equal measure. "This is where no one will find you," Marcus replied as he checked the security systems. "This is a tomb. Then we better hope you do not need to stay long." 3 more assassination attempts had followed the first. Each one had been more sophisticated than the last. Each one had used technology that Marcus could not identify. After the third attempt, he had made a decision. He could not protect the princess on Concordance Prime, where enemies could hide in crowds and strike from shadows. He needed to take her somewhere isolated, somewhere he could control, somewhere he knew every corner and every entrance. The mining outpost in the Kepler 442 asteroid belt was perfect. It was also miserable. Lyrethan made her feelings clear in the first hour. She complained about the temperature and the air quality and the lack of proper food. She complained about the cramped quarters and the ugly walls and the constant humming of the power generators. Most of all, she complained about being forced to share this space with a human Marcus. Let her complain. He understood that she was afraid, and that fear often wore the mask of anger. So he said nothing and went about his work, securing the outpost and setting up early warning systems and preparing for whatever might come. Days passed in tense silence. Lyrethan spent most of her time in the small room Marcus had prepared for her, refusing to come out except for meals. Marcus spent his time watching monitors and cleaning weapons and thinking about the people trying to kill her. On the fifth night, something changed. Marcus was sitting in the main room, checking his plasma pistol for the 100th time, when Lyrithin emerged from her quarters. She moved silently to the chair across from him and sat down. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then her eyes found the spiral pattern of names tattooed across his chest, visible through his thin shirt. "What are those markings?" she asked. Marcus looked down at his chest as if he had forgotten the tattoos were there. "Names," he said. "Names of what?" "My squad." Marcus paused and his hands stopped their work on the pistol. "My family. They are dead." It was not a question, but Marcus answered anyway. 3 years ago, in the outer colonies, we were ambushed by rebels who had bought weapons from someone with very deep pockets. He resumed, cleaning the pistol with slow, careful movements. "I was the only survivor, and you mark your body with their names." Lyrithin's voice held curiosity now instead of contempt. "Why would you do this?" "So I never forget." Marcus looked up at her with those soft brown eyes that she still found so strange. "So they stay close to me, always. Among my people, the dead are returned to the crystal lattice of our homeworld," Lyrithin said. "Their memories are absorbed into the collective resonance of our species, and they become part of something greater than themselves." "That sounds peaceful." "It is efficient. But do you remember them?" Marcus asked. "As individuals, I mean, as people you loved." Lyrithin did not answer for a long time. "We are taught that individual attachment leads to individual grief," she finally said. "And individual grief is considered a weakness that serves no purpose." "Maybe grief is not about serving a purpose." Marcus set down the pistol and looked at her directly. "Maybe it is about honoring what we lost and carrying it forward." "You are a strange species," Lyrithin said. "We have been told that before." Something almost like a smile crossed her face. It was the first expression other than anger or disdain that Marcus had seen from her. Over the following weeks they continued to talk. Marcus learned that Lyrithin had been groomed since birth for her role as princess. She had never been allowed to choose her own path or make her own decisions. Every word she spoke and every action she took had been designed by others to serve the political needs of the Dominion. She had advisors and servants and guards, but she had never had a friend. She did not even know what friendship felt like. Lyrithin learned that Marcus had grown up in the cramped corridors of a colony ship, the son of engineers who had died when he was barely old enough to remember their faces. He had raised himself in the harsh world of frontier settlements and found family in the military, in the men and women who fought beside him and died beside him. He understood loss in ways that Lyrithin was only beginning to comprehend. On the 20th night, another assassin found them. Marcus killed the attacker in close combat, his body moving with a speed and violence that shocked Lyrithin. When it was over, he stood in the corridor, breathing hard, his hands shaking not from fear but from the sheer intensity of protecting her. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why do you fight so hard for someone who has given you nothing but contempt?" Marcus turned to look at her, and his eyes held something she had never seen before. "Because everyone deserves someone willing to fight for them," he said. "Even princesses, who do not know they are lonely." In that moment, Lyrithin felt something crack inside her. Something that had been frozen for so long, she had forgotten it existed. She did not have words for what she felt. She did not need them. She simply looked at this strange human with his marked body and his fierce heart, and she understood that she was no longer alone. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Marcus had been hunting the truth for weeks, and now he finally held it in his hands. The data crystal glowed softly in his palm, filled with encrypted files and hidden communications and evidence that changed everything. He had pulled it from the body of the last assassin, a silent killer who had gotten closer than any of the others before Marcus put a blade through his throat. The encryption had taken days to crack, but Marcus had learned patience in the long years of frontier warfare. Now he sat in the mining outpost and stared at the information, scrolling across his screen, and felt his blood run cold. "What have you found?" Larethan asked from behind him. She had learned to move quietly in the weeks they had spent together, picking up human habits without even realizing it. Marcus did not answer immediately. He was still processing what he had discovered, still trying to understand the full scope of the conspiracy. The assassins were not sent by the purist faction. He finally said, "Then who sent them?" Marcus turned to face her, and his expression was grim. "The Galactic Concord." Lyrathan's crystalline bones flashed with colors of shock and disbelief. The Galactic Concord was the governing body that maintained peace among the stars, the ancient institution that mediated disputes and prevented wars and protected the rights of all species. "That is impossible," she said. "The Concord exists to preserve order. The Concord exists to preserve power," Marcus replied. "And certain members of the Concord see a human Volanthi alliance as a threat to their power." He showed her the evidence. File after file of communications between Concord officials and the assassins who had tried to kill her. The plan was elegant in its cruelty by killing Lyrathan and blaming it on human extremists. The conspirators would destroy any chance of alliance between the two species. Humanity would remain isolated and weak. The Volanthi would retreat into their ancient isolation, and the established powers of the Concord would continue to rule unchallenged. "They fear us," Lyrathan said slowly as understanding dawned. "They fear what we could become together. Human adaptability combined with Volanthi technology and wisdom." Marcus nodded. "We would be unstoppable, and they know it. What do we do with this information?" It was the first time she had said "we" when discussing their situation. Marcus noticed, and something warm flickered in his chest. "We have two choices," he said. "We can expose the conspiracy, which would shatter the Concord and possibly start a galactic war. Or we can stay silent and hope they eventually give up trying to kill you." "They will never stop," Lyrathan said. "As long as the possibility of alliance exists, they will keep sending assassins." "I know." Lyrathan moved to the window and looked out at the stars. Her people had survived for 10,000 years by avoiding conflict. They bent and compromised and endured. They did not fight. They did not rebel. They did not challenge the established order. But look where that had gotten them. Still targets, still alone, still treated as pieces on a board to be moved by others. "My whole life I've been told what to do," she said quietly. "I have been shaped and molded and directed by people who claimed to know what was best for me and for my people." She turned to face Marcus. "No one has ever asked me what I want." "What do you want?" Marcus asked. "I want to stop being afraid," she said. "I want to stop being a victim. I want to fight back against the people who think they can control my destiny." Marcus smiled, and it transformed his scarred face into something almost handsome. "Then let us fight." They began building their coalition in secret. Marcus reached out to human contacts in the military, men and women who had served with him and who trusted him with their lives. Lyrathan contacted members of her own species who had grown tired of the Volanthi policy of endless compromise. Together they found allies among other species as well. There were many who had suffered under the quiet tyranny of the Concord, many who had been exploited and marginalized and ignored. The Cathari, a warrior race whose homeworld had been stripped of resources by Concord-approved mining operations. The Solani, peaceful traders who had been forced to pay crushing tariffs to protect the interests of established powers. The Marathi, scientists whose research had been suppressed because it threatened to upset the technological balance. One by one they came together, united not by hatred, but by hope. Hope that things could be different. hoped that the future did not have to be controlled by those who feared change. Marcus watched Lyrethan as she spoke with each new ally, as she listened to their grievances and shared their pain and promised them that together they could build something better. She was not the same princess who had looked at him with contempt on Concordance Prime. She had grown into something new, something stronger. She had learned to feel and to fight and to hope, and Marcus realized that somewhere along the way he had fallen in love with her, not the cold, distant princess she had been, but the fierce, compassionate leader she was becoming. He did not tell her there would be time for such things later. After the battle was won, or there would be no time at all. Either way, the words could wait. What could not wait was the war that was coming. The Concord had learned of their coalition. Ships were being gathered and weapons were being prepared. Soon the conspiracy would strike. With all its power, and the fate of the galaxy would be decided. Marcus looked at Lyrethan, and she looked back at him. No words were needed. They both knew what was coming, and they would face it together. The Volanthi homeworld burned. Marcus stood on the bridge of his command ship and watched the crystal cities crack and shatter under the bombardment of the Concord fleet. Billions of lives hung in the balance as plasma fire rained from the sky, and ancient towers that had stood for millennia collapsed into dust. The enemy had struck first, and they had struck hard. 300 warships had appeared from hyperspace without warning, their weapons already firing before anyone could react. The conspiracy had decided that half measures were no longer enough. If they could not prevent the alliance through assassination, they would simply destroy one half of it entirely. All ships engage. Marcus commanded through the fleet communication system. Protect the evacuation transports at all costs. His coalition fleet was outnumbered nearly 2 to 1, but they had advantages the enemy had not expected. Human tactical creativity combined with Volanthi shield technology and Kethari weapon systems created something new, something the Concord had never faced before. The battle raged across the system as ships clashed and exploded in flowers of light and fire. Marcus directed his forces with the calm precision of a man who had spent his entire life preparing for this moment. He saw patterns in the chaos that others missed, weaknesses that could be exploited, opportunities that lasted only seconds before vanishing. Beside him, Lyrethan coordinated the Volanthi defense forces, her voice steady despite the destruction of everything she had known. She had come so far from the cold, distant princess he had first met. Now she was a warrior and a leader, and something more, something that made his heart ache every time he looked at her. The enemy flagship is moving into position, one of his officers reported. They are preparing their main weapon. Marcus looked at the tactical display and felt his stomach drop. The Concord flagship was enormous, a dreadnought-class vessel bristling with weapons that could crack planets. If it fired its main cannon at the Volanthi homeworld, there would be nothing left to save. All ships concentrate fire on that flagship, Marcus ordered. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew it would not be enough. The flagship's shields were too strong, and their fleet was too battered. From the fighting, they could not break through in time. Then saw a tiny flaw in the enemy formation, a gap in their shield harmonics that appeared for just a moment as the flagship prepared to fire. If a ship could reach that gap, if someone could deliver a warhead directly into the flagship's reactor core, the resulting explosion would cascade through the entire Concord fleet. It would end the battle in one stroke, but the gap was deep inside the enemy formation. Any ship that tried to reach it would be destroyed long before it arrived. Any pilot who made that run would not be coming back. Marcus looked at Lyrethan and found her looking at him. She understood immediately what he was thinking. No, she said. It is the only way. There must be another option. There is not. Marcus reached out and took her hand. The first time he had touched her since that day on Concordance Prime, when he had thrown her to the ground to save her life. You know there is not. Tears formed in Lyrathan's silver eyes. Something that should have been impossible for her species. I will not let you do this. You cannot stop me, Marcus smiled gently. You taught me that some things are worth more than one life. Your people and our alliance and the future we are building. That is worth everything. And what about us? Her voice broke on the words. What about what we could have been? We will always be, Marcus said. In the alliance we built, in the people we saved. In the future we made possible, we will always be. He released her hand and turned to his crew. Prepare my fighter, he ordered. And transmit the enemy weakness data to all allied ships. They need to know how to exploit the opening I am going to create. The crew obeyed in shocked silence. They understood what their commander was about to do. Lyrathan followed him to the hangar deck, her crystalline bones flashing with colors of grief and desperation and love. Marcus, please, she begged. Do not leave me alone again. He turned at the door of his fighter and looked at her one last time. You are never going to be alone again, he said. You have our people now, you have our alliance. You have everything we built together. He climbed into the cockpit and started the engines. Through the communication link, he heard her voice one final time. I love you, she said. I should have told you sooner, but I was afraid, and now there is no time, and I am so sorry. I know, Marcus replied, and his voice was warm. Despite everything, I have always known. He launched into the fire and chaos of battle. His fighter weaved through enemy ships, dodging plasma bolts and missile swarms with a skill born of years of combat. Behind him, he could hear Lyrathan crying and giving orders and holding herself together because that was what leaders did. The gap in the enemy formation was closing fast. He had seconds at most. Tell them what humans are capable of, Marcus said through the communication link. Tell them we are not lesser. Tell them we love so fiercely that we would burn our own stars to protect what matters. Marcus. Goodbye, Lyrie. His fighter disappeared into the heart of the enemy flagship. For one eternal moment, nothing happened. Then the dreadnought exploded in a cascade of light that outshone the stars. Themselves, the blast tore through the Concorde fleet, destroying ship after ship as the cascade failure spread. Exactly as Marcus had predicted, the enemy formation collapsed. The bombardment of the homeworld stopped. The Volanthi were saved. On the bridge of the command ship, Lyrathan fell to her knees and wept. She wept for the man she had lost and the future they would never share. She wept for the princess she had been and the queen she would become. She wept because that was what you did when someone gave their life for you. That was what it meant to love like a human. And as the tears fell, she made a promise to the stars. She would make his sacrifice mean something. She would build the future he had died for. She would carry his name in her heart until the end of her days. And she would never let the galaxy forget what one human had been willing to give for the people he loved. 10 years had passed since the Battle of Shattered Stars. The galaxy was not the same place it had been. The corrupt factions of the Galactic Concord had been dismantled. Their leaders tried and punished for their crimes against countless species. In their place, a new coalition had risen, built on the principles that Marcus Cole and Lyrathan had fought for: equality among all species, mutual respect regardless of age or technology or power, recognition that every civilization had something valuable to contribute. And at the heart of this new order stood the Human Volanthi Alliance. The partnership that had changed everything. Princess Lyrathan was now Empress Lyrathan. ruler of the Velanti Dominion, but she ruled differently than any monarch before her. She listened to advisors but made her own decisions. She valued efficiency, but also understood the importance of individual grief and joy. She had adopted human customs into Velanti tradition, including one that had shocked her people when they first learned of it. A single name was tattooed over her heart, visible through her translucent skin in the human style Marcus. The name glowed softly against her crystalline bones, a permanent reminder of the man who had taught her what it meant to truly live. On the anniversary of his sacrifice, she traveled to the site of the battle as she did every year. The debris had long since been cleared, but a monument floated in the void now. A massive structure built by human and Velanti hands working together, crystal and steel intertwined in impossible patterns, forming a shape that somehow evoked both species while belonging to neither. His name was inscribed on every surface. In every language of the Alliance he had helped. Forged ships from dozens of worlds had gathered here for the memorial ceremony. Human vessels flew beside Velanti cruisers and Kethari warships, and Solani traders, former enemies, now stood as friends, united by the legacy of one man who had refused to accept that different species could not work together. Lyrithan stood at the viewing port of her flagship and looked out at the monument. She was alone, as she always requested to be for these moments. The years had changed her in ways that went beyond politics and power. She smiled now, genuine smiles that reached her silver eyes. She laughed and felt everything with an intensity that would have terrified the princess she had once been. She had learned to love like a human, and in doing so had become something new. "Hello, Marcus," she said. Softly to the stars, she spoke to him every year on this day, telling him about the changes and the progress and the children of both species who were growing up in a galaxy transformed. The academy we built in your name graduated its first class last month, she continued. Human and Velanti cadets training together, learning from each other, becoming friends in ways our peoples never thought possible. She touched the name over her heart. "There is a little human girl in the program named Sarah," she said. "She reminds me of you somehow. The same stubborn determination in her eyes. The same refusal to accept that anything is impossible." Tears formed in her eyes, but she did not try to stop them. She had learned that tears were not weakness. They were love made visible. "You asked me once why my people do not mourn like humans do," she whispered. "I understand now. It was not that we felt less. It was that we were afraid to feel it all, afraid that grief would break us." She pressed her hand against the viewing port, reaching toward the monument that floated in the darkness. "You broke me, Marcus," she said. "You broke through every wall I have built around my heart, and you showed me what it meant to be truly alive. And in breaking, I became something stronger, something better, something worthy of the gift you gave me." Far below, on a dozen worlds, the future Marcus had died for was taking shape. Human and Velanti children played together in crystal gardens and steel playgrounds. Ships, bearing both species emblems, patrolled the borders, and partnership scientists collaborated on projects that would have seemed like magic a generation ago. In the halls of power, when young delegates argued about whether such cooperation could truly last, the elders pointed to the monument in the stars. They told the story of a human soldier who had loved a princess not for what she was but for what she could become. They spoke of his sacrifice and his courage and his absolute refusal to accept that love could not overcome the barriers between species. The Velanti had a new word now, borrowed from human languages and crystallized into their own tongue. The word was hope, and when they said it, it sounded almost like his name. Lyrithin remained at the viewing port until the stars shifted and the monument disappeared behind the curve of a far distant planet, she did not feel alone. She never felt alone anymore. Marcus was in the alliance they had built and the people they had saved, and the future they had made possible together. He was in the name tattooed over her heart and the love that burned there still, undimmed by time or distance or death. Human astronomers, using Volanti technology, had discovered something strange in the exact location where his ship had been destroyed. A point of light too small to be a star, but too bright to be debris. The scientists could not explain it. Lyra Thin did not need an explanation. She knew he was still out there somewhere, watching over her, waiting for the day when her own long life would finally end. Volanti lived for centuries, but they did not live forever. One day, she would join him among the stars. Until then, she would continue building the future he had believed, and she would continue loving with the fierce human heart he had awakened in her. She would continue teaching the galaxy what one species had learned from another: that life was precious because it ended, that love was powerful because it cost something, that hope was worth dying for because it was the only thing truly worth living for. The memorial ceremony ended and the ships began to disperse. Larethan returned to her duties, to the endless work of maintaining peace and building bridges and honoring the sacrifice that had made it all possible. But she carried him with her always, two souls bound together across the vast darkness of space, two hearts beating as one even though one had stopped long ago. That was the destiny they had shaped together. That was the legacy of the human who gave his life for the alien princess, and it would endure for as long as the stars continued to shine.